The world is deep, deeper than day can comprehend. You're listening to Deeper Than Day, the depth psychology and archetypal astrology podcast. We're your hosts, Delia Shargell
and Jessica Garfield-Kabbara. To enter this dialogue with us, visit our blog at deeperthanday.com.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to session 5. Today is June 9th, 2017, and we are coming to you during a full moon. The sun is in Gemini, the moon is in Sagittarius. And today we're doing our first couple session. We have a guest, Matthew Stelzner, who is a veteran astrologer. He's been in practice for 22 years, and he is also a longtime podcaster. He runs the Correlations podcast, where Jessica and I have been recurring guests since 2011. So we are super honored to have him here. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you so much. I feel totally honored to join you lovely women.
Thank you.
Yay!
So glad to be here, and I'm not in charge.
Isn't it great?
We're holding you today.
Thank God. I need to be helped.
So we would like to take this opportunity and honor the transit by talking about, we're talking about the therapeutic space and how the moon has a correlation with that. We are containing the emotions that come up in therapy or counseling astrology. And Matthew, I just think it would be great for you to give us some of your wisdom of, from all your years of experience, talking with us about what it's like to hold that kind of space for the process. People doing healing types.
Wow, that's a big question, but I'm really happy to talk about that. So what's it like holding space for people as an astrologer in the container of astrology?
Yeah, I guess it would be really great for us to talk about maybe some of the distinctions between the therapeutic space, the astrological counseling space, whether those distinctions matter, just what
Okay.
I'm sure your process has evolved a lot over.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on this for sure. Delia, you and I started out in the same counseling psychology program towards Master's in Family and Couples Counseling, and you completed that.
Mm-hmm.
I did not,
Mm-hmm.
but I got pretty close. I
You
did
got
all
really
the I
close,
did all
Matthew.
the training, and I was starting to get my hours, and so I was definitely, when I first started in that program, I was also in the first class with Rick Tarnas and Stan Groff that you were also in,
Yes.
Delia. And so there actually has been this big theme for me of trying to integrate psychotherapy into astrology, trying to integrate my experience with holotropic breathwork and the Groff cosmology into my work. And so I've done a lot of reflecting on like what's unique about psychotherapy, what's unique about astrology, how do they support each other, how do they interfere with each other potentially, because I think they can. And I definitely at this point am very clear that astrology is quite different than psychotherapy, at least whatever most psychotherapy looks like. I think an astrology consultation is quite different. It hasn't always been that case for me. I don't know if I've always felt that way, because when I first started out, I was definitely trying to be a therapist on some level and holding whatever the structure of therapy and the using therapeutic skills and counseling skills to engage the client. And I think I still do that to some extent. I certainly use the counseling skills that I've gained over the years. But at some point, I just started to just really realize that this is totally distinct. And I actually, there's some part of me that realizes that there's a kind of there's certain possibilities when it's not psychotherapy. And so at this point, the way I think about what I do is, I think first of all, I create a container for something to happen. That's first responsibility, to try to create a healing container. So that's in common with psychotherapy. Creating some kind of sacred space, ritual space, because I feel astrology is a ritual. And I'm now telling my clients that I feel that what we do in an astrology reading is oracular. I'm kind of defining it as oracular. Not that I'm an oracle, but that the client is visiting the oracle with a capital O, and that somehow I'm facilitating oracular space. And so for me, what that means is that if you create the right intention and container, and then especially if you bring any kind of ritual elements in, there's a greater potential for receiving messages. And I think what astrology and other divinatory techniques like the tarot, to me, they're consciousness technologies that amplify the capacity to hear messages from the loving higher self. To me, astrology is a practice about learning to recognize that there's a love force in the universe and it's sending you loving messages all the time. And so I think astrology and the tarot make it easier to hear those messages, and actually that you can develop an ear for those messages much more rapidly than you might just on your own. Not that some people can't develop that through any kind of spiritual practice, but I think there's something unique about astrology and the tarot. I combine them both in my work, and I think they actually amplify each other. And so that's how I think about it now, that I'm creating a ritual space, oracular space, and using my understanding of what the symbols are of astrology and the symbols of the tarot, and ultimately trying to be some kind of clear channel with everything that I say, and trusting that somehow, either in the images that come with the tarot or the transits that they happen to have, or like the specific words and sentences that come through me, which I have no idea sometimes how those things happen. Like I don't always say the same thing, obviously, and what's in charge of that? I have a sense of mystery about it. So those are my initial thoughts, Delia.
Wow. Well,
and Jessica.
One of the things that I love about what you just said is that kind of intentional creation of the space, kind of attuning more and more yourself and in the ritual that you're creating with the person you're sitting with to attune to this oracular dimension. That it's that practice of attuning, again and again and more to that state which is there for us, but which, if we have not practiced, our capacity to read or understand may miss.
Yeah, miss, or it's there's a sense of it being foggier, or it's like it's not as clear a message. And I think when you create a ritual space, oracular space, that it's like putting a lightning rod up and amplifying the capacity to really receive the frequency of the higher self.
As I hear you describe this process of being a clear channel in the oracular ritualistic space, I was wondering if we could go in and begin to see if we can describe that moment when you're looking at the astrological chart or transits, or you're looking at the tarot. You're with those living, ancient, evolving symbols, and then that combining with a deep intuitive sense. You're pulling something from the field of being with that person. That moment where those two things come together, the intuition or tapping into the unconscious of what wants to come through, and the living symbols. What do you feel is your sense of what's happening there? Like, what might be going on in that moment?
For me, it's a feeling of magic. for sure. And so that's part of what I'm hoping to facilitate is whatever magic is. That's what I know when a reading's really going well. Both of us are feeling like something magic is happening, and it also feels like a heart chakra opening for me when it happens. When it starts to reveal itself. Whatever the messages are that are clearly coming through, for me, when I start a reading, I'm the first 10 or 15 minutes are probably the most like psychotherapy. Actually, maybe the first half hour. I do 2-hour sessions generally. And so the first half hour, I feel like I'm kind of settling in with the person, trying to engage with them around whatever the biggest questions are that they've come with. And often they'll tell some kind of story about a conflict in their life or something they're challenged by or something they're not quite sure in terms of how to proceed. And so sometimes in that first 30 minutes, I'll engage psychotherapeutically, asking questions and giving feedback. Even sometimes what feels like advice starts to come through, which is, I think, different than psychotherapy and definitely very different from my general orientation is not to give advice. But that's different from what I feel is more like a channeled kind of engagement. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Jessica. Delia, what do you think?
Oh, I love that description. I mean, I think that sense of the magic is really something that, I often feel in my body really strongly. You're saying like a heart opening. I often get this experience that I learned to refer to as the truth bell, where I just I have a somatic experience where I just really feel like a subtle but definite state shift where I recognize that this is just not my ego, or at least that's what I presume.
Yes.
That there is something happening that I'm participating in,
right.
that is really beautiful.
Just to finish my thought, I was saying that in the first 30 minutes, I'm engaging with them and trying to kind of narrow down to what is the guiding themes or questions going to be. And then that's when you start to engage the symbols and see how the universe is going to respond. So I'll start out with a tarot spread that I don't do the whole thing with, but then I go back and forth between the tarot and the natal chart and transits and sometimes collective alignments. And I just trust that my intuition is going to kind of key in on whatever the most powerful symbols are that are resonant with what the client has shared with me and what they're trying to gain in terms of answers to their question.
As I hear you say this, I feel like it's dawning on me for the first time how much it's a tripartite situation when you're going into this oracular space. I always have viewed it as a really intimate relationship that's reciprocal and mutual. There's a give and take, but I'm really feeling that dimension of like, oh no, there's the third presence that is the universe, and both people are doing their best to listen to that, but it's the astrologer who is doing their best to give voice to what it is that they're hearing and seeing from the person and the symbols, and doing their best to be a clear channel to speak to what they feel the universe is saying in response to this meeting of these two people.
Yeah, totally. I think I'm looking early on, I'm trying to find some symbol that I have a sense is really going to help, and sometimes it'll just come, the first tarot card or the first astrological alignment that I kind of key in on. But I guess that moment when the magic starts to happen, I see it in the client, really. I feel it too. I think I'm resonating with the client, but I can see in their face or hear in their voice if I'm not looking at them. I can hear the energy shift and can feel like, oh, it's starting. It's clear the higher self, the client's higher self, or their guardian angel or whatever is present in the room. And I'm always praying before each reading to be a clear channel, and hopefully that my higher self is somehow in contact with their higher self and that we're kind of cooperating to bring something through.
Yeah, that's that sacred preparation for setting up the container so that the magic has the best opportunity to come through. You're like priming it as much as you can to do your part for the magic to come through in that 2 hours with that person.
Yes. Yeah. And I usually, about an hour before the session, sometimes early in the day, it doesn't matter, but I'm also kind of tuning into them in advance, energetically, trying to kind of move towards the encounter, but not in a prepared way, like you're saying. There's preparation involved, I think, and that preparation has looked different for me over the years. But for me, it always involves some kind of ritual and prayer.
It's really making me think about the very drastic difference that psychotherapy has in the way that we hold our patients or our clients, in that it's not just for 2 hours or one time or a series of sessions, but it's an ongoing, living, often long-term, multiple-year relationship. And it's almost like the client lives in our psyche all the time on some level. Whereas with astrology clients, it's for that window of time, that designated window of time, and there's a clear beginning and an end.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. I think that clarifies for me one of the really important things that makes astrology possible for me and why I don't think I could be a psychotherapist, like what you're describing. Because I'm such an intensely introverted and empathic person, it's hard for me to disengage sometimes and kind of clear my energy. And that's part of my growth edge for sure, is how to let go of each reading and clear each time. And I like, as a professional astrologer, that I'm not going to have to see the same person every week, or even most of the time more than a couple times a year. And there's something about that timing, or if you're meeting with somebody, a regular astrology client is an awesome kind of experience too. Or I've got people that I've been working with for 10 or 15 years or whatever, but it's different. And because it's less regular, there's perhaps a greater power to each time, because the person's showing up often in a specific moment where they're specifically guided to find some technology to help them hear what they can't hear themselves in that moment, or need some amplification of whatever they're hearing.
So you're saying that the fact of its sort of specialness is really a huge factor. It allows the psyche of your client probably to be more open. This is a rarity.
Yeah, I had a magical reading last night. It felt magical. It felt super. I don't know. It was every reading's different. I really liked this particular reading, but it was somebody that's been trying to set something up with me for like 3 years, and somehow it just didn't quite sync up. And so it's like been a kind of 3-year journey of us almost syncing up. And he finally arrived, and I think because it was a longer journey for us to come together, there was something more magic about it that I really enjoy. Yeah. I'm having a question right now for you both as astrologers. It has to, and maybe as psychotherapists too. Like, what is it that's different when you have a client where it's just like your frequencies are just super in sync, and it's like natural and easy and relaxed, and the magic happens more readily, versus I had a client the other day compared to last night where I felt kind of tense and anxious during parts of it, and for different reasons, my own countertransference. We can talk about transference, countertransference, and how they play out in astrology, but yeah, there's very different kinds of readings that I've had, and it's a real mystery sometimes why it's that way. Sometimes it's because you're just in very different places spiritually or whatever, or one person's less mature than the other or whatever. But I guess I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
You want to go first, or?
Sure. I mean, I have plenty to say, I think.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, wow. I mean, there's so much. I think because the psychotherapeutic relationship, I mean, we don't know when we begin how long it's going to be, but it has the potential to be a very long-term relationship.
Yeah.
And that process of attuning and allowing the other person to kind of live inside of my psyche, which you're describing, very different from what you're doing at the moment. They can enter, and they can, you can commune with them, but then you let them go, and they're clear.
Right.
That
if I'm able to.
If you're able to, right? Well, that's, I mean,
whether it's a day later or a year later or whatever.
Exactly. Well, that's the $1 million question for all of us who work in the helping professions, isn't it? But in my attunement psychotherapeutically is often to the transference countertransference field. It's really it's the field that we are sharing and creating and experiencing together energetically, and the subtle variation and nuance of that, of how the field is responding through time is one of the primary tools that I'm using when I'm working with someone, whether I'm intentionally holding the astrological symbols in mind or not. That long, that slower kind of more measured kind of dipping in, dipping out experience feels different from what you're describing. And I think because I sort of, you and I kind of came to this work from these different directions, and that I started, I was using the astrological symbols in my therapy, but I wasn't really talking about it so much, and you were working in a more one-off kind of way than a long-term way over time. And I think that one of the things that I've always kind of focused on is how if you are being used as that kind of oracular channel, or making yourself open, or allowing yourself to be open to the universe moving through you, there's more of a sense of like delivering the download of, kind of translating those symbols to the other person's awareness or consciousness. And that feels so different to me from the stance that I typically hold as a psychotherapist, which is much more receptive and much more, listening and listening and listening before I offer a reflection. And, for me, kind of coming to the other side later in life, it has felt really, kind of awkward or uncomfortable to make such a different, to take such a different position where I'm speaking often. Right.
Yeah. Jessica?
Yeah, I think about it as frequency, like the vibration. So for me, an astrological consultation is a high energy, high powered vibrational exchange. So I very much see it as channeling, and that I may never see that person again or for a long time. And so I really open up myself for a lot to come through in a very potent way that's concentrated. And like Delia was saying, it's a download, it's a transmission. And that's why it's recorded, because it's a living relic that takes on so many new dimensions and layers of meaning with each passing day. And it just really can live on forever. Whereas with psychotherapy, that same potency is there, but it's stretched out, it's elongated over a much longer period of time. And I think each one of those things has a different healing potential. And when you're in that oracular channeling space of astrology, the power and of what you're saying and how that person is receiving that message through you is often as concentrated and as potent as it is coming through you. Whereas in psychotherapy, like Delia was saying, we're much more in a listening, receptive role, and then we reflect. And so we say less, but our presence is sustained. And so the power of our presence over a sustained period of time has a different valence of healing than the oracular 2-hour session. And I think that they're different ways of healing, equally potent,
Yeah.
but accessing different part of the spectrum of the psyche and of healing. And there's something to me about the elongation of the potency in the psychotherapy that begins to touch on chordal structures, particularly around relationship and attachment and emotional issues, whereas the astrological session can have components of that, but it's more about them receiving and interpreting a message than it is about syncing our nervous systems together and reattuning relationship patterns and dynamics in the interpersonal field.
I have one thought about that. When you bring up the attachment issues, I feel like that is there in a very different way in an astrology reading. And what I feel like I'm hoping to facilitate, and this is why really my goal as an astrologer, I'm sure it's the same as a psychotherapist, is, I don't want my client to become dependent on me if possible. Like I'm hoping to facilitate something where over time they become more securely attached to their higher self and able to feel that connection really strongly. And that's why I sometimes encourage my clients to learn the tarot and astrology for themselves, to have some kind of tool that they're working with regularly that helps amplify that message from their loving higher self, so that they feel more of a secure attachment there.
I think that I want to say one thing to that. I think that's a really beautiful intention. And as an astrologer, I also take a similar approach. As a psychotherapist, I'm taking the same approach, but it's through the dependency on me in our relationship and allowing the messiness of the intimacy and the attachment and the dependency, that the facilitation with a better relationship with themselves and their higher self happens. Whereas in the astrological session, it's not about becoming attached to me as a person,
Right.
but about helping facilitate their own relationship with the divine, and me modeling the potential and possibility and helping remind and awaken them of that capacity in themselves by mirroring them so deeply and potently back to themselves in that moment that it hits something in their soul that sends out this rippling effect of awakening. Where in psychotherapy, I my job is successful if they're dependent on me, and through that dependency, we massage out their deeper attachment to themselves.
Right. No, I totally get what you're saying, and I think maybe when I was talking about dependency, I meant like whatever the healing journey is in psychotherapy. At some point, I assume you're hoping to empower them to, move off and have their own ability to live and support themselves without an ultimate dependency on you, I guess is what I was referring to.
I mean, most certainly. But I think how, what I'm hearing each of you say, I would maybe describe it as being, how do you say it? It's kind of like a macrocosm and microcosm. The relationship between these two things is really a continuum rather than an either or. That how I experience that attuning to the client in psychotherapy, attuning to the client's needs for attachment and dependency is, everyone is not the same, clearly, and to be able to be made use of as another person for them to be quote unquote dependent on, but also as a function, that my function is of attuning to them in the way that we're talking about, helping people make the transition to attuning to one's higher self. That if they can feel through the therapeutic relationship what it feels like to be deeply, to be understood and to be held with compassion and curiosity rather than judgment, that that process is what people are often working through in the healing process. That they are learning how to take on the function that the psychotherapist for them, and through that process heal and understand, through the messiness, understand their own attachment issues and questions. And I think that ultimately the goal is really the same. It's to encourage people to remember that may be obscured for all sorts.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing to that, which is, oftentimes when you think back on your therapy, for those who've been in therapy, you remember so little of what your therapist actually ever said to you. I mean, just there's maybe a couple things they said that stick in your mind. The main thing you remember is the feeling tone of the relationship and the arc of its unfolding, and, how it began and where you ended up. Whereas with astrology, because you're speaking so much more and so directly, there's a lot of imprinting that happens verbally, and the person really hangs on, to the things that you say, and there's a lot less room, or because of the lack of time in the astrology session, to know or to understand how they're interpreting what you're saying. You can get a sense of it in the session, but really you have no idea how they're taking the meaning of the symbols that you're translating. Whereas in psychotherapy, if you meet one week and you say something, the client comes back the next week and says, last week you said this and it made me think this, and that you were thinking this about me. And then you have time to unpack it and really go into it. And that's a lot of where the meat is. Whereas in astrology, you really that's just not part of the deal. That's not part of the container of what you're signing up for.
Right.
Yeah, which brings us back to that whole idea of practicing rigor in astrology and being careful in how we deliver the message, because people can tend to hear things through their own lens, and if that is a lens of fear, then they're going to make something out of it that perhaps was, or even the deep.
Yeah, whatever the opposite of making lemonade out of lemons is.
The opposite of making out of lemons.
Thinking something brown.
Sticky.
Well, there's one other thing I wanted to say that feels, in terms of how I approach my practice as an astrologer, I'm explicitly thinking about what Rick Tarnas used to say in his classes. He would call it learning to honor the gods. And for me, as an astrologer, I want to be trying to honor all the gods in the way that I'm working with the person. And so for me, that means that there's different dimensions of what I'm doing. Like, for example, Jupiter is one god to be honored in a session, in a big way, of course, but just in the element of like humor, like trying to have astrology reading contain humor and laughter, ideally, because then that god is present, and then also, of course, Saturn, and trying to bring wisdom into the session, whatever my cutting edge of maturity and wisdom is that I've come to over 20 years of practicing astrology or whatever. I'm trying to be a channel of Saturn, and I'm also trying to be a channel of Mercury in terms of using language in a very careful and intentional way. And I'm also trying to honor Uranus and allow for the trickster to come in, where I have no idea what's going to happen in every session, and I want to be surprised, and I hope that there'll be surprising things that happen in the session. So to not go in with any kind of attitude of controlling, like keeping it totally free. And of course with Venus, it's like trying to bring beauty into the session, having whether that's evoking music or art, or actually bringing them into the session, because you can show a client an image or play music if you want to integrate that into a session. I occasionally do. So yeah, or Mars, like I often find myself kind of holding Mars for the client, where they'll tell me something and I feel that they're not standing up for themselves. So I'll kind of mirror back to them what it would be to stand up for themselves. And then I'm kind of embodying the Mars archetype that they can't hold for themselves, or it's an unconscious thing that they haven't fully integrated. And so I think that that happens in a session in different ways, where the client's unconscious potential can be mirrored back to them in certain ways. If I'm being a channel, that I think that happens.
Yeah, you're really given a certain freedom to be able to play and engage with the client in that way because of the multivalence of the archetypes and their own trickstery, playful nature, and their own desire to be embodied and to be expressed allows you, as you know, in that oracular space, to really have permission to take on those different archetypes and be them and express them. And even the client is giving you permission to access dimensions of their being that might be repressed or shadow material or just unconscious. And you're given permission as the astrologer to really name that and reflect that. And it puts you in a very powerful position to be able to do that. And it's part of the job. It's part of the role that you're taking on.
And I think within the full 2 hours of a session, I think it would be a great intention to have at some point in every session to be evoking all the gods somehow, like giving some acknowledgement to this would be the Uranian perspective on that, or this is what Uranus looks like in terms of if they're looking at me, my body language, I can become the energy, or the tone of my voice, the quality of the words that I'm saying, like all that matters. And I think especially if a client is not honoring a certain god or several gods, those are the most important ones to be evoking in some way, so that the client can see their energy and perspective.
Because I'm kind of feeling into how that's similar and different to that kind of protracted psychotherapeutic experience of the archetypal energies, because it's like you come in and you sort of give them a dose of each god, and I'm thinking that when we look at the mandala of the birth chart as the whole of the capital S self, with all of the archetypes represented, albeit in different capacities or relationships with each other, different natural affinities or different potential blockages, that being able to hold the archetypes and listen for them through time, listen for their expression or how that expression may be blocked in the therapeutic relationship, gives us the capacity to really evoke and maybe slowly help people grow into a direction where they are able to have a freer and fuller expression of those things. I mean, thinking about that thing that Rick Torrance has always said to us, that that a well-worked square expresses more like a that through time we get to evolve these relationships that the archetypal energies have in.
Matthew, I have one more question for you that just came up. I was curious, how do you feel like your practice has evolved since you began 22 years ago? Like, is there any way to give any voice or narration to like what's some of the ways that it's most changed, or you've most changed in the process of working with clients for so long?
That's a good question. Thank you for giving me a chance to reflect on it. I don't know. There's a lot that's changed. I feel like I do an astrology reading very differently now than certainly when the first 5 years that I was doing it. When I first started doing readings in '97, I was 28 years old, So I was right at my Saturn return as I'm beginning I was 27, going to be 28 later that year. So yeah, I think those early readings were kind of Saturn return like, where I was trying to own Saturn. I mean, I was thinking about this earlier, where I mean, our job is to be wise. I hope. I mean, on some level, that we we need to be a channel of wisdom and maturity, wherever we're at. And so, whatever our stage of development is, whether it's our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, there's going to be a different quality of what wisdom and maturity feels like. I feel like I was able to be a channel of wisdom at 28, but I'm certainly at just like a totally different part of my life at this point. And so my wisdom is more the kind of wisdom where you've had your ass kicked a whole lot. I mean, really, honestly, I mean, I've gone through so much in these 20 years, and a lot of it was painful. A lot of it was journeys to the underworld, and flights into the upper world, and the whole process of integrating all that. And so I would say, certainly since I've started the journey of the midlife transits around 35, that I've just been in an ongoing process of my readings, like always going through a kind of death rebirth process in terms of like what my cosmology is. Like my cosmology, my worldview is very different from where it was when I was 28 or 30 or whatever. And so I don't know, I guess my commitment is to be always on my growth edge, always at the cutting edge of my own psycho-spiritual journey, and that my commitment is to share from that space with my clients, trusting that the particular clients that show up are the ones that are most likely to benefit from my current wisdom and maturity, whatever I have of that. So, I mean, to be more specific about what's different, I didn't integrate the tarot so much until about, trying to remember when it was. It was around 2007 or 8, so about 10 years ago. I took the risk of bringing it in a little bit. I think when I first started out as an astrologer, my father's a neuroscientist, and so I have this big imprint of science being the ultimate framework to be coming from, and so that has been a hard thing for me to break out of, because I don't think it is the most helpful cosmology to be coming from. Not that I don't integrate some kind of scientific worldview, but I think I've been letting go of that more and more, and trying to enter into a more just kind of magical orientation, if that's the right word. I don't know, to the work that I do, and being more of this kind of facilitator of magic, as opposed to trying to be a conveyor of information, which I think I used to do it more that way. That I felt this burden of responsibility within the 2 hours to kind of check off all of their biggest natal aspects and their biggest transits. And I never thought that I could do all that, but I put the pressure on myself, and I feel free of that now. Like, mostly, like, I enter into each session, and I no longer am as deeply engaged with their biography. That's one thing that's changed, and I feel kind of liberated by that. I don't need to know so much about them, where I think when I first started out, I was having them fill out questionnaires and talk to me a whole lot at the beginning, and I was doing a whole lot more talking. I'm a Jupiter, Mercury, rising type person, and so you can tell right now I'm in a long, extended sentence right here, and you put a few of those together, you lose time that could be oracular. And so that's what I'm trying to be aware of more, is not being so much a transmission of the checklist of their chart, as just trusting that the right symbol for today will emerge.
I love that. That's so cool. It sounds like you just trust yourself in the process so much more after these 3/4 of a turn of a Saturn cycle of practicing. And
I have a lot more fun. I have a lot more fun in the last 7 years than in the first 13. I enjoy the creativity of it. For me, each reading is an artistic thing, maybe above everything. It's some kind of work of art that's happening, cosmic art, and so yeah, for me, I try to come into each reading as available to a unique kind of creativity that can happen with that person's unique frequency. And so there's been some wild readings in the last 7 years that where I just like, wow, what was that? Like it just felt like no other reading I've ever done.
I love that. It's so inspiring to hear that whole description of and what you're allowing to come through you. You know, I mean, the kind of capacity for creativity and play, and just like and as you said, just trusting the process, which you know we say a lot, but to do.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
definitely that's to me. It's definitely working without a net. That's one thing that I think I like. I think I'm a circus person. My name's Stelzner, which means stilt maker in German. I think I come from some line of circus people, and I yeah. So there's a way in which we have to trust. Like I think in the beginning I was a little more scared. Like, what if the chart doesn't work? What if the wrong tarot card comes up and it's just stupid? It makes no sense. Like I don't feel that way at all anymore. I just I have a sense of awe and wonder about the whole process, and I think that's why it works often. Like if you have that kind of attitude, like this is amazing. What's going to happen this time?
Well, you have the bouncy boots to prove it. You're
Exactly.
come from circus people. I mean, if you
Yes.
ever want to see a Sun Jupiter person get on bouncy boots and bounce around really high and far, then
Yes.
come to the Stelzner.
Well, we'd have to time travel back to my Uranus opposite Uranus transit because I don't know if I'm getting back on those bouncy boots at this point.
Really?
Maybe. I don't know.
All right.
Maybe.
I'll never forget driving down the street and seeing Matthew Stelzner bounding along just
That was-
randomly on his bouncy boots.
that
Like,
was-
whoa, look at that!
That was a magic moment, Deals. Like
Totally
I had
was.
just got those bouncy boots in the mail. These bouncy boots, just so anybody knows, they're a certain kind of workout boot that has big springs on them, and you can dance in them. I discovered at the first Burning Man, and what was I saying? Oh, that's right. That I got them in the mail, and I wanted to test them out. Like I wanted to see what they could do, and I ran around the neighborhood here in San Francisco, and Delia never drives down this particular road that I don't. You were with Evan, I think, and they drove by, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Deals just drove by. Like I was literally out in those boots for like 15 minutes, and she found me.
It was,
That was like the only time I
Fated,
ran around the.
meant to happen.
Yeah, what was up with that, Deals?
I don't know. I had to experience this total Jupiterian infusion to catalyze my own, underdeveloped Jupiter. That's, big part of your function in my life.
Is that what I do?
Yeah, totally.
And you remind me to stay grounded, Deals, with
That's
your
right.
Saturn.
That is totally right. That's what we do.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not doing the bouncy boot thing so much. I got really good footwear now that helps me not be in such danger. Because those bouncy boots broke a couple times, and I broke my iPhone and scratched my leg up.
Ugh.
I don't want to have that anymore.
There was just back before the bouncy boots. There was something that you said that I heard you say the other day when we were having a personal conversation that really just has gone deep into me, which is about staying on your growing edge as an astrologer, like as someone who enters into these healing spaces, how critical, how there's a duty, there's a responsibility there to stay on your own growth edge psychospiritually. And I was just wondering if you wanted to say anything more about that, because I think that's a really profound way to frame what it is that we're doing here as practitioners.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think from the time that I came out here to California to go to California Institute of Integral Studies, I came here as a quite young person, 24 years old or something, and I wanted to figure out how to live my life and find peace and serenity because I didn't have a whole lot of it. I think I had a lot of psychological pain that I came here with, and I was just so grateful when I found astrology itself as a spiritual tool, as a spiritual practice. For me, astrology is a Vipassana meditation practice on one level, and so in those early years, it was doing a lot of meditation and yoga and doing my own psychotherapy, and of course, I've done a huge amount of Stan Grof's holotropic breath work and sacred medicine work and 12-step work, and it's my commitment to just always be working with whatever the next phase of my process is, and I don't think it ever ends. And I, not that I've done that perfectly, I could do way more, but I try to do my best with it. And what I've found is the kind of work that I'm doing at that moment is the kind of clients that show up. Because I also, this is one thing that I think is different from being a psychotherapist. I think I'm more self-revealing than a psychotherapist might be. And my philosophy is more that of the 12-step tradition, which is that when you work with a mentor in the 12 steps, I call them sponsors. The sponsor, their only role is to share their experience, strength, and hope with the other person. They're not giving them any advice or telling them what to do. They're just saying, this is my story. This is how I've grown. This is my hope for myself. And I'm going to just share it for you. And so I do that in my readings. I will share my growth edge. I'll share the transits that are relevant to my growth edge, not to make it about me, but to use my experience as a potential mirror to the client. And I think you can do that in psychotherapy, but I'm sure in a different way.
I was wondering, Delia, if you wanted to say anything as a psychotherapist or as an astrologer about the difference there in working your growth edge as a psychotherapist, because clearly that is also happening there, but in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how different it is. I think that, as you said, Matthew, that people tend to show up on your doorstep who are mirroring something to you, and that is, such a profound part of the process of being a psychotherapist that, I think anybody on a growth path, but I think in these professions, if we are paying attention, we're going to be confronted with all kinds of unworked material in our own psyches, in the relationships that we have. We can't take ourselves out of that equation, and we are going to be, constantly having our own issues worked by the process of being with other people who are working with their issues, and especially when we're attuning to the archetype of the cosmos and really trying to, as deeply as we can, understand how to use those in responsible ways. So I think, yeah, it doesn't ever stop. Yeah, and that whole question about self-revelation, one of my favorite topics. But I think I'm learning a lot about that, and yeah, I'm not going to say anything.
Okay, for
enough.
later.
For later, we'll come back to that another
You
time.
don't want to be
Another
be
session.
self-revealing about
exactly
the
about the process of
self-revealing.
self-revelation. I mean, I will say that.
I was just going to say something.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you
Oh,
can
I am going to say
please,
something.
yes.
Yes, I am. I think it's wonderful to. I think one of the things, the real gifts that I've been given over the past several years, as I've been bringing the astrological perspective more into my work intentionally, is really having to confront that psychoanalytic stance of, the therapist is the holder of the space, and the lack of self-revelation is a benefit to the client that offers them something that they may not get anywhere else. And I still firmly believe that, but I think I'm also really being challenged in many ways, because human to human, I mean, it's wonderful to be able to have that connection and to be able to talk about it and to be able to explore it really, really deeply. And yeah, there's a lot.
To have the connection, what do you mean by the
connection?
connection?
I'm sorry. I mean, in the relationship, to be able to bring myself forward as a human being with my own struggles and my own, the things that I've learned, that I've had, which, yeah, I mean, again, it's not just to talk about myself incessantly, but though sometimes that's fun. But I think to do what you're describing, does certainly have a place in psychotherapy. I'm just working to discern what that is.
I think what Jessica was saying earlier about it being stretched out over longer periods of time is relevant to the self-revelation, because you can reveal yourself slowly over months, whatever, if you do it at all. But I think it's part of the intensity of the 2 hour, perhaps the only time you're ever going to be with them. And so there can be a certain power if I reveal something about myself, like that I have 12-step experience. If that's part of their lives, that's a connection right away that they feel safer with by knowing it. So that's part of where it's coming from. I think it can create a certain bond where you can go deeper together if they feel that intimacy.
That's so true. And because you're doing it in that immediate way, this may be an opportunity that you have, in certain ways, you almost have to make that kind of self-revelation in order to feel trustworthy.
Yeah, that's part of it. Like, especially if you're coming in to an astrologer not knowing a whole lot about them, if you just got a referral or whatever, they don't know you from whoever. And like, there is that challenge in the first 20, 30 minutes to kind of sync up and then go on the journey together.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, as an astrologer, the space sanctifies you being a little bit intense and maybe overwhelming. Like, the permission is there for like a lot to come through. Whereas in psychotherapy, it's much easier to overwhelm the client by self-revelation or saying a bunch of things, or showing up in a really big way one week and taking up a lot of space.
Right.
It's hard to process that and take that in. And although in a reading you might not understand everything that's coming through in that moment, it's okay. It's like, it's okay that it's like that. And yeah, even that like place of mystery in the reading, like there's something about that that's alluring and special, and like it's okay that the client doesn't understand necessarily every single thing you're saying, where in therapy, depending on how relational you are with your therapist, you might be pulling something apart for eons. Like, one little thing happened,
Yeah,
Yes.
You have to be much more mindful is not the right word, because you have to be mindful as an astrologer. But like, I give myself more freedom to play with whatever the edge is there, because I trust that in the oracular sense that why I'm telling a particular story in a particular moment, I don't know, but it just came out. That's a story from my life that maybe I'll never tell again. And maybe it won't resonate with them, but maybe it will 5 weeks later when they listen to the recording. So I think what you're saying, Jessica, is really important, because it's just a totally different context. And, if they don't like what you said, they just don't ever come back to you. Whereas if you've been working for 3 years, there's more on the line.
most definitely. So we wanted to give a shout out to Matthew here and say that you can find him and his work at stels.biz, and you can go on there and make an appointment with him for an astrological consultation. He's amazing. He's wonderful, as you can clearly tell here, and has so much wisdom to offer. And so go find Matthew at stels.biz.
And MatthewStelzner.com. They both go to the same place. So whatever's easier to remember.
And don't forget to check out the Correlations podcast, which has many volumes of experience.
Yes.
Delight.
Yes. Just just Google Correlations podcast. It'll come up. Thank you both. I've had a real fun time. Real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. I feel totally blessed to have had this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much for being with us. And it's just been, it's always fun to sit in the room with you guys and talk.
I know, I love being here with the three of us, and thank you so much for being our first guest and popping our first guest cherry.
Oh, wow. That's great. I am so happy that that happened.
Yeah. And maybe we'll do it again. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Please visit our blog and leave comments and ask us questions and join the conversation. We'll see you
Thanks so much,
soon.
everyone. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The world is deep, deeper than day can comprehend.